Stay tuned for the Joan Quinn Profiles. As an editor for Andy Warhol's Interview, the Los Angeles Herald-Examiner, LA Style, and Detour magazines, Joan covered the social set, the Hollywood hotshots, the international art scene, the mysteries of food, the excitement of travel, and the fabulous world of fashion. Joan continues to find creative people on the cutting edge who make things happen. Here's Joan Agajanian Quinn.
Hi, I'm Joan Quinn, and welcome to the Joan Quinn Profiles. Waiting to be profiled are lawyer, writer Ross Schwartz and author Herbert Gold. Lawyer, screenwriter Ross Schwartz was born and raised in Los Angeles. He graduated from Hollywood High, where he was student body president. He received a Bachelor of Science in English from UC Berkeley, and he gathered honors from the Law Center, where he graduated at the George Washington University in D.C. Ross was born into showbiz. His father, Sherwin Schwartz, created and produced The Brady Bunch and Gilligan's Island. Did you ever want to be one of those characters when you were growing up?
No. No, I didn't. I did hang out on the set some.
Did you?
Yeah, but no, I didn't want to be the characters.
Where did your father find those people, those characters?
Well, that's an interesting question to ask me. He spent a long time developing them. It wasn't like he thought all of a sudden of these 7 characters. Each of these characters was thought about to kind of, in a way, represent a different part of society, so that Gilligan's Island would be like this social microcosm.
I see. But it was all good, clean fun.
Yeah.
It was so good, wasn't it?
Yeah.
And you come from other show business people in your family.
Well, my uncles are all writers. My brother's a writer and producer. My sister is a performer and a writer. I was almost the last one to join the fold. Although I do have a brother who's a doctor.
Oh, good.
Right.
Your mother probably wanted that.
Right.
When you were on the set, did you ever want to act?
No.
You didn't want to do any of that?
No. I would be a horrible actor. I can't even remember lines.
Well, then why did law school come along?
Well, at the time I wanted to be a writer because I was doing writing back then. But it was during the 60s, and everything was very political, and I wanted to be a public defender.
And you were?
Well, I worked as an investigator for the Public Defender Service. And then, after I graduated, and I thought I could do both.
Write and practice?
Right. Because I was very unrealistic, but I didn't know it at the time. And then I kind of got sucked into law and did that for 25, 30 years before I decided to go into the family business.
But you did entertainment law, so
Yes.
wasn't that kind of like the family business?
Well, I represented the family in the family business.
Oh, you did as well?
In that sense, yes.
Oh, you did?
Right. So
but you had other people as...
Yeah, I was mostly a music lawyer, and I represented lots of platinum acts and composers, and it was fun. It was fun.
Did you have to learn the music business, or did you know it from Berkeley, from the 70s?
No, I had to learn it.
You had to learn it?
Didn't have to learn music, but I had to learn the music business.
So when you were practicing and investigating, were you actually writing?
I started writing, I guess about 10 years ago, and the overlap was I did the normal artiste thing in that since I had a full-scale practice going on, I would get up at 3 in the morning.
Oh, you would?
And I would put in a couple of hours, 2 or 3 hours, trying to write my first script, teach myself how to do it, and then I would go off and practice law, and then I would come back exhausted and start again.
That brings up the question, did you go to any screenwriting classes? Did you take any of those kind of classes?
I didn't take any classes, but I am a member of a writing group that meets every Wednesday.
Still?
Still. It's led by a woman named Carol Gordon, who is absolutely spectacular.
So you have given up the law?
I have 2 clients.
That's good.
I have my family. Right.
Yeah.
And I guess I'm allowed to say that I still represent the Beach Boys because I've been doing it since 1976, and it's kind of hard to give up. Plus, I need to do something to bring in some cash flow.
So do you do, yeah, because writing you can starve like being an artist, right?
And I don't want to do that again.
But do you do the legal work still, or just the music stuff, or is it all combined?
Well, no, I don't do any of their music stuff. I just do the legal work.
Okay, so we got your writing going,
right,
and we have a great film, Bottle Shock.
Oh, did you see it?
So wonderful.
Oh, good.
It's so great, yes. So tell us the story.
In 1976, there was a tasting. In 1976, Napa was kind of a cowboy town, and and everybody who knew anything about wine, or at least thought they did, they thought that the French made the great wine, and we made jug wine, and we make some pretty good jug wine, but that was about it.
Jug wine.
Right. Then what happened is there was a man named Stephen Spurrier who owned a wine shop in Paris, and he decided, really kind of as a goof, to celebrate America's birthday, 1976, to do a blind tasting. And there was no question that they were going to win. So he was going to do it fairly, and he did. But everybody knew the French were going to win. Well, the French didn't win, because when they pulled off the sacks and they found out who won this tasting, best white wine in the world, according to this tasting, Chateau Montelena Chardonnay. So then they got all these judges got all really nervous, and they had to try to make sure that the red wine was going to be French. And when they pulled off the bag, it was Stag's Leap.
Oh, it was. It was from California as well.
Right.
These were two California winners.
Exactly.
And that was 1976.
Correct.
And where did they do the tasting?
Paris.
Oh, did you go to Paris to research this?
No, no. But I did go to Napa. But I always go to Napa. So.
Right. So how did you learn about this story? I guess all wine people know.
All wine people know, and I had known it for a long time. But since 1976, I had a new girlfriend at the time. Her name is Lynette Pabon, who I'm now married to. And she wanted to catch up on my wine knowledge because I had been going up to Napa since Berkeley.
Oh, right.
You know, sometimes I would go to the riots, and sometimes I get in my Toyota and go to Napa. So she wanted to catch up my wine knowledge, and so she took this course, and she discovered the Paris tasting. I had just finished a script, and I was looking around for another thing to do, and she said, "Well, why don't you do the Paris tasting?"
Did she help you write it?
No. It was her idea to do the Paris tasting.
So
but she did help me research it.
Did she?
Yeah, because then we had to go through that process.
And what's the research? Lots of drinking of wine?
Oh, absolutely. Well, the thing was,
could you tell the difference?
Could I tell the difference in wine? You could tell the difference. Anybody could tell the difference between a good wine and a bad. Between a great wine and another great wine, that's a little tougher.
So, that's what they were judging, right?
Yes, yeah. I'm not. I don't have that kind of refined palate. But
so go on.
Oh, I'm sorry. So she, but I said, well, there was a tasting, and there was a bunch of French people who slurped and spit, but I'm not sure that there's a movie.
Oh, I see. Right.
So then we decided to go up to Napa and interview everybody at Napa that we could, and we did. And then there's one part of the story that I guess it doesn't really spoil anything, where something happens to the wine. And
yes. Well, we have to talk about that. Hand me the Chateau Montelena, because this is really a beautiful bottle. And the label, is it an old label?
I think they have changed it over the years, but it has Chateau Montelena, and I think it was built in like 1890.
Yes, it was beautiful, and the setting was beautiful, and the location was gorgeous. You actually shot up there?
Yeah. Yeah.
And how long were you up there?
I was only up there for 3 days, but the shooting was 30 days. It was a very quick schedule.
And it was all the whole thing took place during the 70s.
Yes.
So the costumes were all 70s. The music was 70s. Did you have anything to do? Did you
Not
write
really.
that into the script?
Well, only by reference. But no, that was all the director Randy Miller.
Randy Miller.
Yeah.
And there were Dodge pickups and Ford pickups. I thought it was so great. They looked organic.
They went to car clubs all over the Bay Area to get those.
They looked beautiful. They looked like they belonged, because it was like these kind of dusty looking trucks, pickups.
Yeah, right.
And they just kind of matched the terrain So it was really beautiful. Okay, so were you part of the casting or
No.
anything like nothing?
After I sold the script, that was pretty much my involvement.
Is that what happens with
Yeah.
a screenwriter?
Well, in my situation, that's what happens. It doesn't happen all the time, but and then it was basically turned over.
So you weren't on the set.
No.
But one of the things that was important was the Hispanics' involvement.
And that was crucial. Well, my wife is Hispanic.
Oh, she
Yeah.
is.
No, but that wasn't the. But that maybe a little bit. There's some things that I wanted to make sure about. I wanted to talk about women in winemaking.
Which you brought an intern into the thing. So did you
Exactly
make her
right.
up? Most of the people were real, but you had to make up some of the people.
Well, what it was the incidents were not necessarily made up. They might have been rearranged.
Oh, I
Okay.
see. I see.
So there were female interns. Whether they were there at that year, well, okay.
I see.
So, but she was kind of there was a particular female intern
Oh, so
that I
you
did
did-
based her on, and the French at that time, women did not make wine. I'm not even sure they make wine now.
Uh-huh.
But here they do. Some of the greatest winemakers in Napa or California are women.
Oh, so that's great.
Some of the greatest winemakers are Hispanic.
And you showed that they had worked in the fields and they knew the soil and all that type of thing.
And they did. And so that was important to me, to show the Hispanic influence and
And Gustavo was one of your characters?
Gustavo was one of my characters. And Gustavo was interesting because I had heard about Gustavo when I interviewed a guy named Mike Gergich, who was the winemaker
Gergich,
there
right.
at the time.
Oh, is that where Gergich was with Gustavo?
Gergich was the winemaker at Chateau Montelena during this period of time.
Oh, I didn't know
Mike
that.
told me that he hired this young guy named Gustavo
I see.
because he was good friends with Gustavo's father, who was a grape picker at BV, where Mike he was assistant winemaker.
Those are kind of in the good old days where
Exactly.
everybody knew everybody, right?
Exactly. So he promised his father that if Gustavo ever wanted to learn how to make wine, he would hire
Oh,
him.
that's great.
So when I wrote the story and I had this character named Gustavo, he was the only person I didn't talk to because I didn't even know if he was still there. So I Googled Gustavo and wine and found out that there was this guy, something called Gustavo Thrace
Thrace.
Winery,
Yes.
and he's making wine. And if you read some of the notes on his page, yes, he was there. So I emailed him and I said, "This is going to sound like a wacky email, but I just wrote a script in which you star."
And there.
He had no idea. He emailed me back an email which showed me that he thought I was a nut.
Oh, he did. And the person who plays him is Freddie Rodriguez.
Freddie Rodriguez,
who was
right.
really great
Yeah.
in that role. He's very good. The story is more about, not so much about the wine tasting. It is as a coming of age.
Yeah.
Like the son is a kind of a renegade, and I think you brought that all together. Tell us a little bit about that family.
About the Jim and
About
what
the
we
Montelian.
well
yeah.
here we get into a little bit of divergence because remember I wrote the original script and that was rewritten.
What was it, Bob and Bo?
Randy Miller and Jody Savin, and they were the ones who emphasized the father-son
I
relationship
see.
more. I had it there, but they expanded it.
So that's what happens to a screenplay. This
Oh,
is
yeah.
interesting because you see the director takes charge, somebody
Right.
else comes in and writes a little bit. That's interesting. The thing that happens in this is there's a lot of hard work, there's persistence, and it's this coming of age where if you do all of those, it proved that they could win the contest.
Right, and the difficulty was, is it built up to this contest, except nobody knew about the contest. So if it was going to be like a regular sports movie where people try and try and try, well, they weren't making.
They weren't making it.
They weren't doing it for that. They were doing it for the wine, and it won.
Yeah,
So,
that was the
No.
point that was so
Right.
well taken in the film. We didn't get to talk about bottle shock.
Uh,
What happens? What is bottle shock?
oh, bottle shock is when wine travels and gets jostled around. For a while, it won't taste good. Leave it for 3 or 4 days. It'll be fine.
Okay, good. Thank you, Ross. Thanks for watching this part of the show. Herb Gold will be on in a minute. Hi, I'm Joan Quinn, and welcome back to the Joan Quinn Profiles. I'm with author Herbert Gold, who was born and raised in Cleveland, or as he says, the Paris of northwestern Ohio. Also, Herbert says, the Golds were the sole Jewish family in Midwestern America. He went to Columbia University to study philosophy, not to the liking of his mother. He wasn't the doctor that she longed for. He had a brief stint in the military, a short time in New York, and he hung with the jazz scene, the beats, and the coffee houses, and then he won a Fulbright to Paris. Herb has written more than 20 novels, some short stories, and lots of essays. Haven't you? You did write a memoir before, but it was in the form of a novel.
Well, it was a novel, but since I made things up, at that time you weren't supposed to lie, so since it was a true story, but I was talking about things that people said before I was born. Well, obviously, I didn't have a tape recorder there before I was born.
But what was it called?
Fathers.
Fathers.
Fathers. It was a bestseller, and it's still in print in various places.
Well, what was it about? The stories that your family told you?
No, it was about, I was thinking about what it was to be a father in various ways, and I used my own father, my grandfather, whom I didn't know, my great-grandfather, whom I didn't know, and I was at that time also a father, and fatherhood is troubling and interesting, and moving, I think, and that's what the book is about.
So tell us a little bit about how you became the chronicler of the Beat generation.
Accidentally. I went to school at Columbia, and I was a contemporary of Jack Kerouac and Allen Ginsberg, and I knew, because Allen was really a friend of mine, Kerouac was not.
Were they in school with you?
Pardon?
Were they in school with you?
They were at Columbia at the same time I
Columbia.
was there. And Allen and I were really friends. I avoided Kerouac, but I knew him. And one of the quarrels I had with Allen Ginsberg was that he adored Kerouac and I didn't. And through them I met some of the other people like William Burroughs and many of those people. And I got interested. I was different from them. I was somewhat straight. I got married young. I had children young. That was not the tradition in the Beat, among the Beats.
But were they from Middle America?
Well, Allen was from middle New York.
That's what I mean. They were more from the East Coast, weren't they?
A lot of the beatniks of the 50s came from odd corners of the universe, like Cleveland. There was a whole
like Cleveland,
beat colony.
like you?
There were beatniks everywhere. Not as many as there were hippies. Suddenly everybody was a hippie in the 60s. But at that point, the rebellious kids would wear black turtlenecks.
Yes, didn't we
and
all?
Listen to jazz
Right.
and smoke a little grass.
Right. But so, did that start happening when you moved to San Francisco?
The beat thing started happening when I was at Columbia, which is in the late 40s.
Were you writing about it then, though? What I mean
I
is,
wrote
did
about
you,
it later.
in San Francisco, did you, when you went to San Francisco, it was a haven for poetry and music.
I remember walking down an alley in North Beach with Allen Ginsberg, and he cupped his ear. He said, "You hear that? It's a mimeograph machine. Someone is a poet up there writing poetry."
They're doing their own poetry?
Right. Richard Brautigan called himself the Gestetner Rabbi, and he would sell his poetry on the street corners.
But that was pretty typical, wasn't it, up there?
Every other person was. You threw a stone, you hit a poet.
That's right. How did Paris fit into your life?
Well, Paris had its own beat movement, and when I lived in Paris, I was there for 2 years. I was friends with people like Terry Southern, who collaborated with Mason Hoffenberg and wrote Candy, which became a great success. Was published first by a little Paris publisher, which specialized in pornographic books.
But those were expatriates living there, right?
They were Americans, but there were French beatniks. There were a lot of French beatniks. And I met in I met actually in San Francisco, a French girl who had learned English from beatniks in Paris. And I said, "What are you doing here?" She said, "I am digging the scene."
She's digging the scene.
Yeah.
That's great.
And Mason Hoffenberg made his living in Paris selling le marijuana américain to French beatniks and pre-hippie hippies. And he got more money for it because he claimed it was American marijuana when it was really only African hashish.
I was going to say, where did he get it? He must have had to have somebody
it was
close
hash.
by, right?
It was hash, yeah.
This new memoir is really interesting to me because you start out, it's called Still Alive, A Temporary Condition. You start out talking about people when they're young and then finish that whole chapter when they've grown up. You bring everything into it. It's not just verbatim.
I didn't really want to write a memoir. It is a memoir, but the idea behind it was what happens to us when we get older? What happens to our memory? I believe, which I think is really a Jewish belief, the idea of heaven is very dim. So we have to make heaven on earth. We want to be remembered. We want to have children so they will remember us. Their grandchildren will remember us.
We always talk about that.
We want to create monuments. Some of us want to make art of one form or another. So it's a meditation on death and permanence. We know when we're really young that we're going to live forever. We know that. At the same time, we know we're going to die.
Well, you start telling these old stories because obviously it's taking you back to people who did live and die during your time.
When I was in the Army, I was trained by the Army to be a Russian interpreter, and I was given paratroop training. This was during what people of my age called the war. And I was in actually for over 3 years. And I was in a very small group. We both were supposedly gifted with languages, and also we were paratroops. And in a practice jump, the man ahead of me, who was a friend of mine, someone I liked very much, didn't go out. And if you don't go out, you can't go out because they're on what's called a stick. So you had to kick him out. So his name was Norman. So I kicked him out, and I didn't understand. I was 18 or 19 then. I didn't understand, when we were on the ground, I didn't understand why he panicked, why he got scared. And I asked the officer on the ground, what happened to Norman? He said, "Well, you know, he's 28.
You think he was too old?
He was too old. He had reached the age when he was fearing death. When my young sons would run around the roof of the building where I live, I would get nauseous when I wasn't scared of jumping out of airplanes at age 18 or 19. Now I can get nauseous if I look out of the window of a tall building.
But that's the thing that I was talking about, how you take the past and bring it into the future in each chapter. And the book jumps all around your life. It doesn't just follow suit.
No, it's not. It's a memoir. It's memoiristic, I would say.
It's interesting the way it happens.
But it's a meditation, really.
Yes, that's what I thought too. That's how I felt. Like chapter 12, The Romance of Ambition, and you talk about Saul Bellow.
Yeah, Bellow was someone I knew when I was very young. He was a bit of a mentor, and he was the brilliant young writer. I met him in Paris, actually. He was a great help to me. We quarreled over the years. We were friends. We were not friends. He was very difficult.
Was he? He was difficult?
He had a lot of vanity. That's not unknown among writers, vanity. But at the end of his life, toward the end of his life, he came out to San Francisco and he wrote me a letter saying, "I want to mend my fences with you." We spent a day sitting in Huntington Park, and it was really touching. He knew he was 84, I think the age I am now, 84, maybe 85, and his wife was pregnant. And he knew he wasn't going to live. He has a child. He lived only about 4 or 5 years after that.
That's really difficult, isn't it? To have a child and you know you're not going to see that child grow to a
I think a lot of women objected to that. A lot of women took offense at it.
I was just going to say,
but I asked him about it. He said she wanted a child. He knew.
Yeah.
She knew.
Right.
He was an old man. She knew she was at the age when if she didn't have one now, she wasn't going to have one. And she knew what the deal was. And he knew what was happening to him. He said to me that day, you know, I used to be really proud of my sense of smell and my memory, and I'm losing both. And he knew what that meant.
But you didn't lose any of your memory. You've got it
People
down
are
pat.
different. People are different.
You know, it's like a travelogue in a way. You talk about streets and villages and...
Yeah, I seem to remember what I need to remember.
You left out the recipes.
If someone asks my name, I look at my driver's license. I do remember my name, actually. Yeah, it's... I think before there was Google, there was memory.
There was, that's what
so
I
you
was
have
thinking
the meat Google in your head.
And
it's called the brain.
This Still Alive, Chapter 11, what is it about? It's...
I don't know them by
it's
number.
From, the swan jumps. What, isn't it like the swan jumps like the fish? And it's like a fish thing and a water, and you're talking about you don't know any Jews who sail. I mean, I think you've come up with these wonderful little tidbits of history.
I was raised complete in a town which didn't have any Jews, and so it took me a struggle to discover that I knew I was a Jew because I was treated like one. Sartre wrote an essay about that. That's how you know what you are, what people call you. But I began to discover, I learned, studied, meditated on that, what the advantages were.
The advantages, yeah, great.
There's no heaven, that's one thing. So that means you have to make heaven on earth. It means you can't give up.
That's right. And then now you've become known as a communicator or a person who knows American culture. Are you really aware of aware of American culture
A lot
now?
of things are mysteries to me, as they are to everybody else.
Are there a lot of changes?
Continually changes, and I hope there'll be a big change next election.
Well, we're so happy you wrote Still Alive. I loved reading it. Thanks, Herb.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for being with us. Email jaquinn1@AOL. See you next time.